You're watching The Ready Writer, a show where I get to speak to writers of all different genres, mediums, and experiences. The Ready Writer. Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Ready Writer. I am your host, Casey Bell, and today's guest is Elle Cole. Let's get started. Was becoming an author a childhood dream, or did it kind of happen along the way?
So, yes, becoming an author was definitely a childhood dream. When you're young in school, they give you lots of different projects where they want you to write stories and be creative. And I would write stories and I loved it. Now, when I was doing that, I remember in the fifth grade, I had one of those assignments and I wrote a book and it was laminated and I really cherished it. And my mom, she kept it for years. And so it's something that I think about now and how that really planted the first seed of wanting to become an author. And when I went to college, I took English and history. Those were my majors. And I took a class on creative writing and publishing, and I learned how to publish, but I didn't. And I know that teacher, the professor that I had, she had a lot of former students who had published too. And so it was kind of like that thought was in the back of my mind that you're taking these classes to one day publish. I didn't make it a reality until many, many years later, but those are where the seeds were planted.
When did you, um, how did you first get to the step of making it a reality when you said, I'm not going to just dream it anymore, I'm going to do it?
So I started speaking and telling my story about being a caregiver to a child with sickle cell disease. And when I traveled in 2019 to Dallas, Texas, and I was sharing about my caregiver journey, people in the meeting asked me, "Do you have something tangible?" And at the time, I didn't. 6 years prior, though, to that experience, of like 4 years prior at that point to that experience, when my daughter was 5, I had written a book about sickle cell and how to keep her healthy. And I wrote it for her. She has a twin sister. I wrote it for her twin sister too, because I wanted it to be something that I could explain to my children. And if something ever happened to me, I wanted her to understand these things because I knew that by putting it in a story, putting it in a book, it would be something that could live on beyond me. And so that was when I wrote the story first, when my daughter was 5. But I didn't, even though I had taken those classes, I wasn't sure in 2020, it wasn't until 2020 that I really put the time and energy into publishing it. My husband is an illustrator, but I had asked him to illustrate my book, and he didn't really make it a priority because he was like, you're my wife. You're always coming up with ideas. And he didn't necessarily treat my thought of wanting him to illustrate my book as a priority. And so I found some other illustrators that I vetted, and I ended up going with another who was a mom who was homeschooling her child at the time. So we could relate to each other in a lot of ways. And so that is, I chose Kate, if you see my book, to be my first illustrator, and it was perfect. It was definitely the person that I needed to illustrate my book. And getting those illustrations is what kind of lit the fire under me to say, you can do this, make it happen, and make it happen now. I gave myself a personal deadline. And when you give yourself personal deadlines, you make sure that it's going to happen. You make it a priority for yourself. And that's what I had to do, because people were looking at me online, were trying to ask me questions, and you can't answer thousands of people. It becomes overwhelming. So putting the information and the passion in a book just made my life so much easier. And I did it because the need was there. I was being asked for it. And so I had to make it a priority.
So I did see you do have 4 books, 3 of them. Let's talk about the three first that have to do with sickle cell. And so now making the assumption that you wrote these books, not just for one of your daughters, as you said, you were speaking and they asked, do you have anything tangible? You wrote these and published these books for parents or guardians for adults, period, because I'm sure those adults with sickle cell can probably use the knowledge just as well. Is that why you chose this subject, because it hit home?
Yes, I chose the subject because it's what I'm passionate about. My husband and I, we didn't know we were carriers of the sickle cell trait. And because it kind of blindsided us, I felt like we're not the only young people who got married young and found out after they were married, and expecting a child, that their child would have sickle cell. I felt like the things that I was living and the experiences I had were relatable to a lot of people. And I learned that in the United States, there are about 100,000 people that have sickle cell. And it's actually the most common genetic disorder in the world. So the need was there, and it was a great one. And I realized when I was trying to learn and trying to do my research, the quality of publications that were out there weren't something that interest me or that I felt proud of or wanted to show my kids. And I knew that if you want people to listen to this, if you want people to take the information in the book seriously, you have to give them something they like, something that appeals to them and appeals to their senses. So I wrote something that I would buy, that appealed to me and would appeal to other people. And so I wrote my first 3 books about sickle cell because that's where my heart is. That is what I feel like a part of my life has been called to speak up about sickle cell and to be honest and help erase the shame and stigma that can exist in the community. And so this is just a part of my journey in life. And so that's why the first books that I wrote are about sickle cell.
Awesome. And so just one advice to a parent: obviously get the book, do your research, because I know that's what happened with T-Boz from TLC. She was going to the doctors and she wasn't getting any help. So she did her own research and she found out ways she can cure herself from this. And she's living long. She was told she would never have children. I believe she has 2 now. And so there are answers out there. For those who are watching, just give us one thing you shared with your daughter as far as dealing with this.
The one thing that I make a priority in my daughter's life is lessons about diet. A lot of the things that we eat and we take in isn't healthy for us. And I feel like food can be a part of your medicine. You want to make sure that you're eating whole, fresh foods. And in our community, in some areas where people live, they can live in food deserts where there's not a lot of fresh food. And I think it's important to fall in love with different types of fresh whole foods. We often talk about food being a social thing. We gather around and eat together as families, and food becomes a big deal. Regardless of what culture you're a part of, food is a big deal of being human. And so I wanted my daughter to understand that food has power and it's healthy. I wanted to teach her how to grow some things and just fall in love with health, because health is wealth. That is something that you hear people say all of the time, and it's true. And so from a very young age, I have been trying to model what healthy eating and healthy living is, and trying to minimize the amount of processed foods that she has. So it really just goes back to some of those fundamental truths about eat foods that your grandmother could pronounce. As simple as that. That is just kind of that rudimentary knowledge about food and health. And if I could teach my daughter anything, that would be to eat healthy foods and not put a whole lot of oil and a lot of sugar and a lot of other different types of things on the food to change its composition, to just enjoy it and enjoy the taste. And I think, I mentioned growing food, but I think knowing where food comes from the ground, I think it's important to have that understanding, because it will encourage that child to try different things that they may not otherwise try.
Thank you for that. So now your other book, your fourth book, is completely off the topic of sickle cell. Why did you choose to write Joseph, a man of kindness and goodness?
So it turns out that I have a podcast called the Cleverly Changing Podcast. And one of my guests, the episode is called Authoring Our Stories. I had two dads who were on the podcast, and they talked about having a publishing company and helping other people publish their books. And they approached me in May of 2021 to be a part of their new project. And it was a project that would talk about the fruits of the Spirit and teach children and really bring Bible stories back into the forefront and help younger generations just fall in love with stories and storytelling from a diverse, multicultural perspective. And I love diversity. I love seeing illustrations with children of color. And so I enjoyed having them as podcast guests. So I said yes to the project, and that is how it came to be. And so it is a part of the All in All series published by Melanin Origins.
That's really great. So you said not everyone has had a class on publishing, so they don't have that first, knowledge. What would you say though to those who, because when I published my books, I first found out through a workshop. I went to a workshop. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. It was just, I had an idea for a book, and in my opinion, it wasn't good enough to be published. So I told God I'll write it, and if it's worth being published, He'll figure it out. So then when this lady tells me about this workshop, I'm like, oh, now I already made the promise. So, and I literally made the promise thinking that it would never happen. So I said, let me go to this workshop. So I got the knowledge I needed. And shocking to me, I published the book because I'm fearful. Like, you can give me all the knowledge and I'll still be fearful. There are people out there who are still fearful, or they're still lacking self-confidence. They're still lacking self-love. So I can't do it because I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have this. I don't have that. And they're still every day, though, with that mindset of wanting to publish a book. So with all the experiences that you've had, what would you tell someone who's on that fence, who really wants to write a book, they're still telling themselves they can't and they shouldn't?
Do it afraid. That is the phrase that a lot of people take to heart. Do it afraid. And imposter syndrome for a lot of people is real. And I definitely don't approach the world like I have all the answers. I definitely appear confident in what I do and what I say, but it's been a journey. I'm the youngest of five, and I grew up in poverty. And I grew up in a community where people often would tell me that I was special, that I had promise, that I was intelligent. But until you believe that yourself, it means nothing. And so I've had a lot of different experiences, and I've been on a lot of journeys. And when I went to college, I went to a college where it wasn't a lot of people who looked like me. And in history, it wasn't a lot of women. And I realized that I have a voice, and everybody goes through different experiences, but your experience can help someone else. When my daughter was diagnosed with sickle cell disease, I couldn't understand why it was happening to my family. But I began to embrace my journey as a caregiver, embrace being a mother, embrace being a wife, embrace all of the things that I was coming into contact with, because I felt like my story was greater than me. My testimony is bigger than me. Yes, I'm afraid. Yes, I'm shy. Yes, I'm an introvert. But when I put all of that aside, I have a special message. And I'm on this earth for a reason. So why not share my experiences? Why not use my testimony to let some child know who's growing up in poverty, growing up in a single parent home, growing up kind of invisible? Because when you're the youngest, my sisters were already adults, some of them, by the time I was born. So it was easy for me to kind of be overlooked. I have some family members who kind of didn't even know I was born, because it was like, what? She had another kid? But you have to make your own mark on this life. And I said, I have these gifts, I have these talents, and I have this passion, this drive. So why not show up in the world and build a legacy as best you can, so that you will feel like your life matters and your life has made a difference? And while I don't have all of the answers, if you want to make sure that you are living life to the fullest, you just got to do it. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just doing it. I'm doing it while I'm afraid, while I don't have all the answers, while I don't have a huge bank account that could just solve all my problems. I'm doing it one day at a time, one moment at a time, because I know the story that is within me is bigger than me.
Yes, that is something I had to learn the hard way, is that there's no reason for you knowing step 25 and you still haven't considered doing step number 1, because you can't even get to 25 till you do 1 through 24. And so that's something I had to learn, is just do it one step at a time, one day at a time. And as I go forth, I'll learn what more I need to do. With that said, what were some of the things you learned about publishing? Because even in, taking the class, when you open up a book, no one says, oh, I wonder how they published it, and I wonder what the steps are to publishing. You just read it. And so you never really know what that author goes through. So what some of the things that you learned about publishing that was like, what? This is what it takes?
So I think the cover, we say things about, don't choose a book by its cover. Like, you go through life and you hear these different idioms and these different sayings that may not be true, because people do in fact choose books by their cover. And your cover can make or break your book. And so I would put a lot of attention into how you make your cover. And for me, although I didn't use my husband as my illustrator, he is the person who did the layout and design. And my husband has a background in art and animation. And so I was able to take the designs from my illustrator and tweak them to make sure that my cover popped. And I've had to change it a couple times, add different tweaks, increase the color, so that when people were walking by, they'll take a second look. They'll say, well, what's that book all about? Because your cover can draw people in. And while my books are children's books, my books are designed to be done the adult with the child. And so I started homeschooling my children. And so as I would read other people's books, I realized that dedication, that passion, that first page where you're talking about why you wrote the book or you're dedicating it to somebody, those pages do get read and they do make a difference. And so I try to be very intentional about making sure that my readers know they were on my mind when I wrote that book, and that, you know, as a mother, I'm sharing these words of love. I'm sharing it, you know, to my own kids because I want them to pick up the book. If you're writing something and you want the people that you love the most to read it, you're going to make that extra special. You're going to make sure that it's well done. And just because you finish your book doesn't mean that you can't make additional changes in the future, because putting your book out is not going to be perfect that first time or the second time. It's something that you will make better over time. And so that's been true for me. It's not like, oh, I'm done. I wrote the manuscript and you could just put it aside, you know, hire your graphic designer, hire your illustrator, get a publicist, and, you know, share your book and all of that. Yes, you can bring other people into the mix, but it's something that evolves over time. It's always changing. And even as you come up with new thoughts and new things, you will still, you know, look at your book and say, man, I could make these additional changes. The fact is, if you keep changing the book, you'll be doing that forever. So that's when you have to tell yourself, I have some other books in me. Let me do these other things and start writing more. And I think getting that first book out is the hardest, because it's harder to start than it is to keep going. And so I've learned that it's something that once I was willing to acknowledge that I was an author, I was willing to say, hey, I can keep doing this. And this is my first book, this is my second book, but I'm going to keep doing this because there's so much more within me. And so that's what I learned, that it's an evolution in progress.
Very much so. Very much so. So thank you so much for being on the show. Are there any lasting words that you would give to the readers, the parents and children?
Yes, we touched on it. Just start. For so many people that I know, that I've come across, they've said, I want to write a book. So I'm here today to tell you, you can write a book. Say, when am I going to write a book? And just start. You know, putting the words down on the paper is actually the easiest part. So write the book and then learn the steps. Listen to podcasts like this, listen to shows like this, because it will give you that encouragement. We've done it, we've become authors. So that means you can too. And that's all, folks.
That is all the time we have for you today on The Ready Writer. I want to thank our guest, Elle Cole, for stopping on by and sharing her journey. And you, the audience, of course, as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Hey, it's Casey Bell, host of Ready Writer of CSB Television, and we will be celebrating the International Black Children's Book Week, which is February 27th through March 5th, 2022. Ready Writer Podcast will be interviewing authors of Black children's books during that week. We hope you join us in this event. For more information on this event and other live as well as virtual events all over the world, go to blackbabybooks.com for more information.